Yesterday I took the opportunity to watch the entirety of Volume 7 in a single sitting, and I gotta say it was an absolute pleasure to do so. Seeing how things evolved from when our protagonists first arrived at Atlas, seeing how it was kind of bleak in Mantle, not as bleak as it would become, comparatively speaking, after watching the entire volume, but still not looking great, but after meeting Ironwood, finding out that there was in fact a plan for a brighter future. A reason for everything that was happening. A plan to help not only the Kingdom of Atlas, but the entirety of Remnant by reuniting them all through the Atlas, or the Amity, communications tower. Then seeing how Team RWBY got closer to the Ace Ops, how they started evolving in their semblances, weapons, fighting styles, becoming closer and more skilled as a team, everything looked pretty bright for the first part of Volume 7, up until, of course, Salem's faction and their infiltrators in the Kingdom of Atlas started having a hand to play. Tyrion and Watts started making moves that eventually forced Ironwood into a corner, becoming more and more constricting as the volume went on. Starting with, of course, Watts getting in contact with Jacques and having Jacques do some shenanigans as well, but he got what was coming to him. Mainly starting off with the massacre that took place at Robin's preemptive victory party, and blaming it on Ironwood's army, blaming it on Penny. So that already worsened the ties between Ironwood and Mantle that were already not great to begin with, and Ironwood started realizing that Salem is now here. We have to have this project get off the ground, no matter the cost. And this phrase, no matter the cost, I will sacrifice whatever it takes, becomes increasingly ingrained in Ironwood as the volume continues to its eventual conclusion that he will not listen to other people's opinions. He is steadfast that he is the only one who sees the bigger picture, that his plan is the only way. So much so to the point that he will execute the reincarnated version of his longtime friend, not to mention also a child, when he shot Oscar unflinchingly and mercilessly, sending him to his death, or at least in Ironwood's mind, but luckily Oscar did survive. And Ironwood himself has encompassed two of the major themes of this entire volume. What it means to be human in the context of Remnant, as well as the concept of fear and who a person becomes under its influence. I plan on doing 2 separate videos on each of these, but in the context of Volume 7, seeing Ironwood's progression from a fairly, human person, he is half metal, but still human, all the way to where he abandons his humanity, thinking that that is the only way to victory. And it's not really a victory in that case. Yes, Salem would be prevented from victory by removing the 2 relics, but I don't really think leaving Mantle to die and abandoning the entirety of Remnant can really be seen as that much of a victory, but, There are a couple scenes that point right to Ironwood's character development, I think at least. In episode 4, when Jean speaks out against Ironwood's embargo, saying that, people may not hate you as much if you didn't do shit like this, Ironwood, kind of gives him a stern look, but he has a very human response, saying, you're right, my image really isn't that great in Mantle, but this is why I'm glad all of you are here. You can help the situation a little bit, brighten things up in Mantle, and go and help them. As he's looking up at Amity Coliseum, he has hope still for a brighter future. Then we come to episode 7, after that massacre took place, and after Ironwood is realizing he's forced into a corner now that Salem is here. Nora speaks out against him, saying that if you keep pressuring Mantle like this, all you're doing is trading your problems for the Grim. Ironwood's reaction to this, he looks like he really wants to tell Nora that, no, my plan is only way to do things, and this is how it's going to happen. But at the last moment, he does realize, no, she does have a point, but things still need to happen this way. And he still puts his plan into motion, but he's still realizing other people's feelings matter. Leading up to the point in which I already mentioned, where Ironwood abandons his entire humanity and executes Oscar. Now, this was all due to the fact that Ironwood was being forced into the corner, and came back a little bit, started to soften up after Tyrion and Watts were dealt with. He thought that, great, finally a moment to breathe. Salem isn't here at this moment anymore. We've dealt with her infiltrators. Going to the place where he felt most safe into his office, the fortress that he had built in Atlas Academy. And on his desk was waiting the one symbol that he probably fears most in the entirety of Remnant, the symbol of the Black Queen. Cinder was also there, another member of Salem's faction. No matter how much he thought he had things under control, Salem still found a way in, was always ahead of him, and that was enough for him. We find out at the end of the volume that Watts is still alive. Ironwood didn't actually execute him, so those words he said as he was holding Watts over the cliff, that I will sacrifice whatever it takes to beat her, he didn't actually mean it at that point. He didn't execute Watts right at that point. If he did want to sacrifice anything to beat her, he should have executed Watts. I'm glad he didn't, because I wanted to see Watts again, because there's a lot more that he's capable of, I think. But Ironwood wasn't truly convinced that that was the way to do things. He didn't truly want to abandon his humanity until after seeing Salem still had a way in. And then he knew that that was the only way in his mind and moved on from there. This is going to lead to a pretty intense conflict throughout Volume 8, as now Ozpin has returned. Ozpin, even after many, many lives, has been able to keep his humanity. He has given up on the fight against Salem a couple times, I'm pretty sure. We know at least once he gave in to alcoholism and, gave up on the fight for probably few decades, maybe over a century. Not exactly sure the timeline, but he did give up at one point. But eventually came back to the fight and has been working towards finding a way to eventually defeat Salem. Yeah, the secrets and everything that he's been keeping has been influenced by things that have happened in his life as well, but this poses hope that Ironwood might have a chance to come back. After abandoning his heart, abandoning his humanity, our tin soldier might yet again be able to become human. Possibly in his dying moments, but we'll see what ends up happening. And speaking of being human, this was also personified by another person, in Penny, as she is constantly wrestling with her feelings and how she feels about certain things throughout the series. She is an artificial person, but an artificial human nonetheless. She has a human aura, a human soul within her, and she wrestles with the orders that she's given. Another theme, following orders versus thinking for yourself. This is something that is personified by the polar opposites of Team RWBY and the Aesops. Team RWBY will follow the orders if they think it is right, if they agree with them, where the Aesops will follow them no matter the cost, letting someone else bear the burden of the decisions rather than thinking for themselves. But with Penny, she's following orders, following Ironwood's orders, but is put in positions throughout the volume where she's blamed for things that she didn't do. That really has an effect on her personally. And then faced with the decision of eventually following the orders to kill Freya. Even though Freya is accepting this, Penny doesn't want to sacrifice another life, eventually coming to the conclusion that this is the only way all of us survive. And eventually accepts the maiden powers and abandons Ironwood's faction in and of itself, joining Team RWBY and Team Juniper. Which makes me wonder now if Team Alpine is going to become something different now that Penny seems to be joining. Maybe she'll join the team, who knows? But a lot of things that have happened throughout this volume. And speaking of the polar opposites between the Aesops and Team RWBY, the way that they were, written throughout the volume was honestly very well done. They were introduced to, we were introduced to their fighting styles and their semblances and how they fought together in episode 3, which was aptly named the Ace Operatives. But we saw that the Aesops were highly skilled, able to fight together in such a fashion that they didn't need to call out any tactics or team attacks or what have you. They were able to just know what each other wanted to do and fight coherently, or cohesively, I should say, as a unit. And in episode 4, everyone was fawning over them. Team RWBY, Team Juniper saying that you guys are amazing, and RWBY saying that I want to fight with my friends like that. And then we find a very key difference between the two teams. The Aesops don't see each other as friends. They don't have that close of a bond. They're co-workers. They'll trust each other with their lives, but that's about it. Whereas Team RWBY is much more than that. Much more than even friends. They are a family. with the amount of things that they've been through, they have such a close bond and have let everything that they've been through draw each other closer, where the Aesops have only let the orders be their influencing factor, not their actual experiences together, or at least so it seems. So as, they're training and becoming a more cohesive unit, it eventually leads to one of the amazing fights in the volume, because there were quite a few. The Aesops versus Team RWBY, and this fight personified a lot, following orders versus thinking for yourself, and eventually Team RWBY did win, and we see that their evolution as a team is mimicking the Aesops now, that they are able to fight together as a very cohesive unit. Not that they weren't able to before, but even more so now. The fight was broken up pretty well, so there were two 1v1 fights with Weiss and Marrow, and then Ruby and Harriet, but with Blake and Yang especially, they were able to fight together very cohesively, not needing to announce what actions they were going to take, and were able to first take out Vine and then take out Elm. Very well done, and I've loved all the fights throughout this volume. Now, as things wrap up, there is a pretty bleak future in store, I would say, as Salem has arrived, and the entire hope and bright future that we see as arriving to Atlas is completely contrasted by the image of when our protagonists are leaving Atlas. The sky is nice and clear and starry, things look hopeful as they are arriving, but as they are leaving, there is a dark cloud of fear that is completely encompassing the city as death is now upon them. Such a powerful image, I gotta say, and this volume has been incredible. There's been a couple things that have actually been hinted at from the very beginning in episode 1 and 2 that, eventually played a factor in how things turned out. In episode 1, for example, when we saw Pietro's office, there was that little, I guess it's like a paperweight that was of a whale. Well, look what ended up happening at the end of the volume. The giant black whale that's going to consume all of Atlas is going to, it arrives. And then also in episode 2, when Team RWBY and the Aesops finally have their conversation for the first time, an actual conversation, Elm says, I'm sorry if we only had knew who you were, we wouldn't have, taken you like that in the first place. And Weiss says, oh, don't worry, you were just following orders, but it couldn't have hurt for you to ask a couple questions first. Implying a major theme that's going to take place between these two teams, that the Aesops don't ask questions, they just follow orders. And this is something that all of them followed, even if it meant their eventual death, leading to episode 12, where even though Clover and Crow had gotten pretty close to one another, had a lot of trust, Clover even stated in the moments before Tyrion stabbed him that he thought he could trust Crow with his life. He wanted to. Like, these two were growing closer. Whether it was more than friends or not otherwise, at this point, it accumulated in Clover following his orders to his death, not thinking for himself. Even though they did have personal feelings, they decided to follow those orders, thinking that those in power were right. And I want to know the history between the Aesops and Clover and Ironwood to know why they followed the orders so closely. What is it that makes them trust Ironwood so implicitly, even after they saw him freak out in episode 12 after losing it? Like, what if this was their plan all the time? What if they wanted us to bring everyone into Atlas, etc.? This is going to tie directly into Volume 8, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how things unfold. Because, in theory, everyone's just going to die immediately with a giant black whale. How are they ever going to defeat it? But there is one way that I can easily think of that they will be able to defeat this massive Grim. I'm going to go over it in a little bit more detail in my video next weekend, stating what to expect for Volume 8, but let me set a scenario for you. We have a black whale Titanic and an Atlas iceberg. So if we had both of them clash, well, I guess maybe in this case we have a black whale Titanic and an Atlas Titanic, because Atlas has a lot of people on it, and both are going to fall from the sky if they end up clashing, but all Penny has to do is get her hands on the Relic of Creation joystick and ram it into the whale. You know, a lot of people are still probably going to die in that situation, but the whale probably would as well. I want to know what that glowing thing in the center of it is as well, whether it is actually the pool of creation that we have no idea where it is, because we've seen the pool of darkness, but the pool of creation might have just been incorporated into a massive grim. But again, different theories, different ideas, but this volume, in and of itself, was fantastic. A lot of different concepts were delved into. Things were written very well. A lot of different fights took place, including some morally questionable ones, with Tyrion and Crow teaming up against Clover. This seemed very out of character, something that none of us really ever expected to see in the RWBY series itself, but it also speaks to the characters' motivations in that moment themselves. Crow knew what was right. He was thinking for himself. This is something that Crow knew when Tyrion appeared. Take care of the biggest threat first. But Clover was still dead set on following his orders and still went after Crow, even though Tyrion was the bigger threat. And this led to Crow and Tyrion teaming up to eventually take out Clover, because Crow, you know, a lot of people question why he would do that, but he did that because he knew Clover would not stop until his orders were fulfilled or he was stopped. Unfortunately, it led to a different conclusion, but still, this fight and many other fights that took place were very, very well done. The series itself was very well written. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of this entire volume, how you felt after everything unfolded, looking at the entire picture and looking at how Atlas was when they arrived versus how Atlas is as the volume ended. I'm really curious to see what your guys' opinions are on the volume as a whole. Let me know down in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoy this video and will enjoy the content coming out for the rest of the break between the two volumes. The Phoenix Festival Tournament is building and on its way. I'm so glad that so many of you are excited for it just as much as I am. It seems there's going to be plenty of different polls. Make sure to vote in the favorite ships poll, as there's still a couple days left with that, and so far there's almost 2,500 voters and things are looking pretty interesting. I'm surprised at the amount of people that have voted in there. I'm so happy that you guys are enjoying the content that I'm putting out, and I hope you'll continue to enjoy it in the future. With that being said, follow me at Phoenix Knight 7, and I'll see you guys in the next video.